All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, What's New in DevTest 8.4. Today we're joined by Chris Kraus, who will be presenting to us. As a reminder, if you have any questions for Chris along the way, please make sure to use the Q&A functionality within WebEx. If you don't see the Q&A box in the lower right, click on the question mark icon in the upper right, and it will open up for you. And with that, here you go, Chris.
Thank you, everyone. So we're excited about our Rolling Thunder towards CA World, and this is our 8.4 release. So you've heard from our communities and our release cadence. We're on track, kind of giving you monthly releases, following our agile methodology, getting features to you faster versus waiting, for every 6 months to give you a big bang. So in this release, we specifically have enhancements around the continuous application insight, new usability in our portal, and then in service virtualization. So with continuous application insight, I'm going to talk to you about how our invoke and verify tests, or our deep validation, is actually been implemented and validating at the database layer for you. And we've done some usability things to allow you to group agents and simplify the dialing up and down of them. In the portal, there's some new navigation helping you find your assets faster, whether that's a test case, a suite, a virtual service, maybe even a copybook. And then there's been some enhancements to specifically to the searching to allow you to use regexes when you're searching into a virtual service image. So the first thing I'm going to demonstrate is continuous application insight. Basically, what our goal is with our deep validation theme is to remove hours from test case creation and manual manipulation. Most people think about, I build a test, maybe I invoke something at the user interface, or at a RESTful interface, and then the first thing I do is go into it and say, okay, now how do I make this not be brittle so the data is all hard-coded? How do I then validate the system of record? In this case, the database has been updated. So what we've done to remove all those manual hours of work is we've done a good job of highly parameterizing the test case for you with an input data set, so you can add extra data later, and then we filter any data from step to step so the test is dynamic and isn't brittle and breaks when things change, like timestamps or, say, account numbers or unique IDs change. And then we're dynamically building SQL statements to make sure that if you do an insert, an update, or a delete, those things actually happened in the database. Okay? So our goal is to actually give you high-fidelity functional tests versus baseline. So we still support baselines. Is the system behaving the same way? That's what you kind of grew to know and love in like 8.0. And now we've been enhancing this to give you deep validation. So I'm going to go on and share my desktop. Okay, and hopefully you see my portal here. So I'm going to come over to an application. So I'm going to fill out a loan application in this UI. I'm going to give it a bank account. So ideally, from a testing perspective, when I click the Submit button, I got back a response that says, hello, demo 500, last 500, your loan has been done, your new checking account ID is 1443. So inside of this, a couple things have happened. There's some specific data we entered into the screen, and the system returned back some data to us. In this case, it was our account ID. So if I were going to write a functional test for this, I'd have to figure out, okay, what is the, say, SOAP or REST call behind the scenes maybe to it, and then figure out the data, what database tables got updated for the system of record. So what I'm going to suggest is that instead of manually doing all those activities, we're going to take a different approach. So I'll just filter down and say, show me what happened in the last 10 minutes. Okay, and let's look. So I have a transaction here. This is the add user object. So this request here, so the ATM machine added the customer to the system, and it did some different things in the background to add the user. And so if we actually look at the SQL statements, I can see it did some insert into the user table, insert to the accounts table, addresses table, and then updated some things. So if I were going to manually write this test case, what I would want to do is go through and figure out, okay, how do I construct the SOAP call, and then start figuring out how do I validate that this address table, the account table, and so forth got the right data in them. So in traditional testing, you may say the UI record something, and then you start going to scripts, start building my validation steps. Or I may need to, in an API, make my call below the UI, say a SOAP call, and so forth, to cause the data to be updated, and then work from there. So I'm going to give this a different approach. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shelve our SOAP call. This is in my ATM machine. Notice it remoted to a new agent, and actually the work was done somewhere else. So this isn't a single-tiered atomic application. It actually had, it traversed multiple calls. So when I go into my shelf, I'm very interested in building a baseline test. So I can see that I have the ability to do expanded, stateless tests, frames, R pairs. All those things are denoted. But what you'll find is there's a new enhancement here called database validation. So what we think about an invoke and verify is we invoke the SOAP call with the test, but we want to verify that all the database updates happen correctly. So I'm going to ask this to create the test for me. I'm going to call this add, and that was user 500. So I'll just make it add 500 and automatically generate the test asset. Okay, so I got confirmation that add 500 was added for me, so that's great. Now what I'm going to do is come over to the handy dandy workstation and see what that test looks like. So this is going to look dramatically different than a baseline test. So what I can see here is the web service call was made, right? So we figured out that, yes, there was a SOAP call with all this data. Now when we look at the data, we'll notice there's certain things like name, city, address, state. The input here was actually reasonably parameterized for us, okay? So basically, we created a data set to drive data into the web service call, and then we have SQL statements behind the scenes to actually validate, did this exist? So originally there was an insert into the user table with the first name, last name, and so forth. Well, what we'll see is we now have a select statement where we're using properties, what's the first name property, what's the last name property, and so forth, to actually validate this. So we've tried to make sure the test case is very dynamic in nature, okay? So I'm going to open the data set. We picked a data sheet because it's easy for you to manage. If you just have these tests that are going to be one-offs and you're just going to run them in as atomic tests, it's great the data is contained in the test. If you see this create, this will actually let you go push out and create a comma-separated list for this data. So if you decide you want to externalize this and say give this to someone else, and they add multiple rows of data, they can do that. So just for example, I know that user 500 was added to the system, so I'm going to update my data set to 501 so I don't get your user already exists. So you can see all of this data is what's used to drive my test case. Now, if I run the web services step, I'll get back to SOAP response where the demo 501 was added. So first thing we have to do is make sure that our validation is reasonable. So we have two assertions. We have the response code and then the response equals. So if I look at this response and I verify it, okay, I can see that some things may be different, some things may be the same. So it could be that the account numbers changed, those type things. So what I want to do is actually verify, are these accounts the same? Okay, and if not, I may want to do things like where I do my XPath exclusions to make sure that they're handled correctly. Okay, so in our case, I know that the first time this runs is great. The second time, this ID field here, it's going to change every time. So as a user, I know that's dynamic data. I want to mark that as something to exclude. Maybe it's a password or different things like that. They will be excluded, causing the test case to fail. So in reality, you're probably going to visit your test a little bit up front to make sure that all my diffs exclusions are in the right place, right? But after that, I should be able to run my test and all these database validations just work. That means that we verified the user and the accounts were inserted and updated. Okay? So if we've done a good job of giving you a high fidelity test, and I change this 501 to 502, okay, and I just run this in the ITR, the reality is the test should work flawlessly. So, oops, let's see. Yep, we got to change the response. I missed one of my XPath exclusions, so I'll cheat and keep going on. Okay. So my database validation step happened. I verified the user was inserted. I verified the accounts existed, the address existed, the update to the accounts, and the update to the address. So the key thing is here, these database validations couldn't rely on hard-coded data. We actually had to figure out what data was returned. So if I look at this step here, what we've done is a very good job of creating filters to say the ID field for the account and the ID field for the address were dynamically returned because they weren't part of the input data. So filter them out. So when we go look at the account here, we'll see that this filter ID 6 and filter ID 9 were actually correlated to the SQL statements over here. So what we've done is a reasonable job of correlating all your data so that when dynamic data is returned, so you add the user, you get an ID for the account, you get an ID for the address, we actually filter that and use those in the SQL statements. That's why the SQL statements are working. So the nice thing is you can now say, I've invoked an operation. It could be on a UI or at an API like a SOAP or REST call, and now we've verified the database was updated correctly. And we've done our best job to correlate the data between the steps. So we can see that like this account number here and the original insertion statement and the original insert statement was the output of the web service step. The name and the available balance and those type of things were actually from our data set here. So what you'll see now is we're building a test case the same way you would build it as if you're a manual user, building a high fidelity test case to invoke an API and then validate all the responses for you. Okay? So we're pretty excited about that. I honestly feel that this will remove hundreds of hours from a tester's life cycle, not having to go through and write the SQL statements, correlate the data, and do all the manual things themselves. Okay? So this, come back to my presentation. So the second thing I want to talk about is some new ease of use and agent configuration. We have some large installs where people have like 17 different agents. So their concern is, I need to dial up or make a change to log levels or say an argument or attribute, anything about an agent, but to groups of agents at a time. And I want to actually make it easier to group them in the user interface. So I don't want to just see a scrolling list of 17 agents. I want to be able to work on them and group their agents so I understand what they're doing. So we've added a new enhancement to the user interface to support that. Okay. So I'll share my desktop. Okay. What I'm going to do is come over to my portal again, and under the settings we have the agent area. So what you'll notice is we still have the broker. We've reformatted this to make it a little bit easier to see. You can see what am I using the agent settings. So that means this card's ESB has custom settings for itself. We've kind of slid over some of the buttons you don't use very often, like the transaction mode or the VSE mode, or if you want to delete an agent, to kind of clear some clutter from the screen. And if I look on my list, I have 2 agents here for my ATMs. So these 2 applications are sitting there and running, and I probably need to manage them or make them do the same thing. So I want to group them so visually I know that they're say the same bit of code working together. Maybe they're behind a load balancer, or maybe they're front-ending an application. And I want to basically work with them as a group. So I'm going to add a group to the system. I'm going to call this my ATMs. Okay. So I now have a new group. And what I can do is I can see for the group what do my settings need to be? Well, I'm actually very interested in HTTP calls whenever these guys are going. So if I set this as full data, what I've said is at the group level, anybody who joins this group, I want them to inherit this. I can also do this for any of the capture levels, right? So any statistics here that I want, I can set them at a group level. So now what I can do is say I want to move these two agents into this group. So notice it says apply settings at the group level. I'm going to move them to the ATMs group. And what will happen is the agents not only graphically move into this group, but they will actually gather those settings. So now this ATM2 has full data on these two clients, and the ATM also has full data. So now they're kind of synchronized in what they do. Now if I need to say dial up something else, say I'm very interested in making sure that we start getting exception sort of counts, get a higher level there, I can actually dial this up. And what happened is the change at this group level now affects everybody in this group. So we show you here that we're using a group setting versus an agent setting in this case, so you can tell the differences between them. So this allows us to actually simplify your working with these different applications, allow you to actually set just basically simplify use of the user interface and dialing up and dialing down. So we find that people have say an application server and may exist in a system integration test and load performance environment, so we want to dial them or tune them the same way and then work between them. We've also done some things here to allow you to actually collapse the groups or expand the groups when you get lots of agents in place, so you can see what's there. There's group activity, so you can actually move your agents in and out of groups, change through multi-select if you want to delete them if you don't need them. And then for people who have large amounts of agents, we actually support your sort orders and filtering. So I can actually say I just want to filter things with a specific name like ATM or so forth. So we've done a little bit of UI work strictly in this agent area to make it easier to deal with groups, align things better, and search and change your sort order here. Okay. So those are the two things we've added in 8.4 for continuous application insight. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is portal navigation. As you've noticed, we're moving more and more functionality into the portal. Our goal is to have this to be your center of the universe so you can actually see your resources, run your test cases, start and stop your virtual services, say build virtual services, observe transactions in CAI, and actually see test cases generated and run them, right? So we needed to get better at allowing you to deal with all the assets that exist. So the first version, Ada, was pretty rudimentary. You could just see specific categories. We then added all resources, and now we've done some fine-tuning from a usability perspective to make sure you can navigate between them fast. And we got some customer feedback that said, really, I like the fact you have tabs, and I want to keep two tabs open. I want to be able to see my tests. I want to see my my virtual services at the same time. So what we did in usability is we actually removed over 3 clicks to make it faster to navigate things minimally, and then opening up multi-tabs removed hundreds of clicks. So we're actually doing some in earnest thought of how are users using the technology and what do they need to make the portal much easier. So I'll share my desktop again. Okay. So over in the manage area, this is all of our resources. So to kind of refresh your memory, in Ada we just had these categories here, the API, the test suites, and so forth. And I could just select something like a test, and I would see just the test. But we actually do it as a tree control inside of here. Now, in later versions, we added the all resources so you could actually get to them. The problem was it opened up, and I would have to say, I'm in my demo project, that's my default project, type that in here, and then filter on tests specifically. But in this case, if I select tests, or say I select virtual services, I'll get a folder tab with those specific virtual services filtered automatically for me. So I'll contrast that to the all resources. In all resources, you'll notice we have an extra column here called type. So this shows me everything in the demo project. Maybe I'm interested in looking at a different project, say Bank V8, so I can see the virtual services and the tests. And then if I have hundreds or thousands of things, I could start my sort order and change them here. What we've done is we've really found that people want fast access to, okay, show me what virtual services I have, show me my tests. Before, that could be done from the all resources, but you'd have to change your search criteria to find the right things and change your sorting. Your filtering gave you all of these things, but it wasn't as minimal mouse clicks as possible. So what we've done now is allowed you to quickly navigate to a type and actually keep those folder tabs open. So I could say, actually, I'm interested in editing a virtual service, and I need to go edit or run a test case very quickly here. So we've basically reduced a lot of your mouse clicks and made it easier to keep multiple folder tabs open. That's the advantage having the folder tabs there. So you'll see an evolution as the product builds. We get more feedback from customers. That's why these calls are great. You're going to find more fine-tuning in how we interact with this new portal user interface. Okay. And the third thing is looking at service virtualization. So these guys are hard at work doing a lot of amazing things. One thing that we got done in this sprint was enhancing the search capabilities. So when you're in a virtual service image, the cool thing is for functional people, they may have thousands of different entries inside of here because they're meeting all their specific business needs. So people wanted to get better at finding data in them so they can understand and maybe create a positive or negative business scenario to test to make sure all the right things happened in functional testing. So we found that people really do need to find data and payloads very quickly. So there's new enhancements to make that a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm interested in my all resources, specifically my kiosk V8. So I'm just going to click my edit button here for the virtual service. Brings up the nice service image editor. So hopefully you're getting very familiar and comfortable with these new capabilities here. We still have the idea of here's our arguments and here's our payloads. And remember, we've done things to make it easier for you to remember when you found something what it does. So you can actually change these names. This is this is with, say, SSN. So this add user object includes social security number inside of it. So we did some things to make it easier for you to identify things. The catch is we need to make it even easier for you to find the right transactions you could give these positive names to. So we use full text searching inside of here. So you can see as you type, we start showing you what's available, and we'll start limiting down based on the data, what stage. You can see the state Texas. It's in a lot of different things, and get users and add users and so forth. So we basically had purely like text-oriented searching, and it was based, did we see this? You know how the concept, I want to find the whole word, or I want to find an exact match on case. So if I say case matching, and I put TX, uppercase it finds it. If I actually change that to TX and change my search, you'll notice I won't find anything because nothing was case sensitive there. So I know that's using state is not a good example, but a lot of times people's purchase order numbers or unique IDs and systems may have case sensitive data. You can also limit to full words. So notice when we said full words, we did realize that text is inside of HTML, so it is a word itself. The other thing we added was actually be able to go with a regular expression. So simple regular expressions is show me everything that starts with anything and it ends in Tate. So we'll find, okay, here is everywhere where something that started with anything it ended in state. Or maybe I'm looking for my Suite 550 or Granite Parkway. So I need to find anything that's associated with a parkway inside my data. So I have full regular expression, so I can wildcard the beginning and ending of things. The other thing is I can actually use /A or /A to say anchor the beginning of something, that it should be, say, 5800. So I want to find all things that start with 5800. So any of your kind of standard regular expression queries will work here. So the idea is you can actually get a little more flexible in finding your data and working with it. So your /A, your /T, your wildcards and so forth. So you can actually get a little more complex. So we're hopefully finding that this is going to make it easier to find the right transactions. Maybe you're interested in this one, and then you can do the appropriate annotations to describe them better, or maybe modify your data for positive and negative scenarios, right? So just more fine-tuning of what we've made available within Service Imaging Editor. And I have to admit, being a long-time service virtualization user, this type of searching in the new presentation in the UI, giving me requests and responses at the same time, and seeing all my users and my attributes on the left is really helped my personal editing and virtual services when I create demos for you customers also. Okay. So at this point, that's what we want to discuss for the new features in 8.4. I'll look to the Q&A to see if there's any questions from the group. Okay. Okay, so I think Satana pointed out in our communities blog, we talked about there's some new enhancements for ACL. They're not visually shown in the UI, so she's just going to discuss what they provide.
Hey, Chris, do you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hey, everyone. As we mentioned, the ACL changes that we made in 8.4 were not in a UI, so it's kind of hard to go through. But what I'm going to actually do is if you can pass me control, whomever has control right now, I can share the documentation. And what that will do is just give you some insight into what we have for ACL today, and then we'll be able to go through any questions that you have. So just give me 1 second as I share that screen. And there we go. So right now I'm just sharing with you my browser, and I went into our ACL documentation. And the documentation, just in case you need to navigate there, you can go to wiki.ca.com/DTS, and it will resolve to this area. Then you can go into release information, and the first thing on that list is the ACL changes. So what we did change in this release, which is really great, and based on your customer feedback, is that we now support multiple authentication providers in order. So you may be able to authenticate against LDAP or some other multiple LDAPs, and then perhaps the local directory that is on your enterprise dashboard, or rather on your VSD, your server console. So you have the ability now to set the priority and the stage of what provider is going to authenticate users to have access to the tool. In addition to that, we have a new way for you to map LDAP groups to our default roles, so that you don't have to enter in manually each user in LDAP into our tool, or even just feed it all over. You now can group them, which makes it much easier for administration and so on. There's a few pages that were changed here that I wanted to point out as we're polling for questions. Remember, you can ask questions at any time in the Q&A panel. Just scroll up to the top of your screen and scroll over to options and find the Q&A panel. In any case, I'll keep going through. The ability to configure your authentication providers is out there. It's been updated to show you how to configure the different authentication providers, including the legacy use case where what we've had in the past in our product. So you can still use that older scenario, but you could use Active Directory or LDAP, and there's ability for you to change things in the properties file. So that's the only UI that we have to share for you today, is pretty much this is what you add to a properties file to change or add on an authentication provider. In addition to that, we have a new file called LDAP-mapping XML that will help you group users or authorize users based on that are authenticated by LDAP and map them to groups. And we have one more area, which is the different scenarios for configuration that you should take a look at. This is helpful to understand how you authenticate with, for example, LDAP and Active Directory, and then manage user roles in the DevTest system, or another scenario of authenticating LDAP and Active Directory and managing the users that are mapped in the LDAP groups. So it's completely different and very much easier and less manual work on this one. But we gave you the information to copy and paste into your authentication files, and that will help you configure that very quickly. In any case, I know this isn't a full demo of this functionality, but we'll be recording a demo of how this works and validating how it works with you out on the community, so take a look at that demo when it's published. That's all I have, Chris, just showing the documentation now. Do we have any questions?
Second, I've got one question from our bright British folks. They said, you showed the parameterization of XML. Does this work for REST and JSON? So yes, with the new test case generation, when we start looking at dynamic data, whether it's going into the step or coming out, we do the same things you would expect, whether it's JSON style data or XML data. So we actually basically look at the values, the same you kind of do with a virtual service. What's the value of an input to the output? Those type of same algorithms are being used. So this works for both XML data and JSON data. The payloads can be transmitted over SOAP and REST and JMS, and we're trying to figure out if people would actually need this for EJB. So we haven't implemented that yet. So based on customer feedback, we'll expand past those. But we're really hoping this helps people with modern development around the REST standards and so forth. And that does include if we can figure out if it's a resource in the URL. Okay. So if there's any other questions? Quiet group today. So Lynn, I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, I don't see any either, so I guess that means we can wrap up for today. But thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Stefana. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. We'll get this posted in the community this week.